Hey everybody, welcome back. Today we've got a pretty cool little Rook Endgame video for you. It's White's turn to move and win the game. Let's see if you guys can figure this one out. Now, if your first instinct, right off the bat, was to play pawn to b7, unfortunately that instinct is wrong. Now, can you tell why this is a bad move after Black plays rook to b8? Now, the problem with that move is that your king is just way too far away from all the action. And Black would eventually be able to win that pawn, and he's going to get there in time to defend his own pawns as well. Now White would play pawn to g4 to activate his king. Black is going after the pawn with d7. King to g2, king to c7, king to f3, and now Black would capture the pawn. You take back and play king to e4. Black is going to respond with c7. You move king to e5, and then d7. And now with that move, White wouldn't be able to arrive on e6, which is the key square to winning this position. h4, e7, and g5, and then g6 from Black. d5, d7, and now White is not going to be able to make any progress whatsoever, as you can see. Even if White doesn't trade the rooks and decides to check instead, this is also going to lead to a draw. We're going to have d6 from Black, and then White moves king to f4. Black responds with e6. We got rook to e1, king to f7, and again, White is not going to be able to make any progress in this position. Okay, now those types of positions are almost always winning for White because Black can't take this pawn. This pawn is really advanced, and it's going to allow the White king to invade Black's space really easily. The key idea of winning this endgame is to sacrifice the b-pawn in order to promote one of your other pawns. But as I said, for doing that, you're going to need your king's help. And this is why the winning move here is to activate your king first. Now either g4 or h4 is a winning move in this situation. Rook to b8, which puts the rook in front of the pawn to stop it from advancing even a little. King to h2. King to d5. And now, what would you play here as White? Now, if you rush to push the pawn, once again, you're going to blunder and draw the game because your king is still too far away, and Black is going to be able to stop him from arriving to that e6 square. King to c6, king to g3, Black takes the pawn, and we exchange rooks. King to f4, to c7, e5, d7, and now we arrive at the same drawing position as earlier. The winning move here for White ends up being king to g3. We've got king to c6 in retaliation from Black, and then we move king to g4. Now, a quick question for you guys. If you were playing as Black here instead of White, what would you move in this position? What is Black's best attempt to draw this game? I can tell you right away, the best move for Black here would be to move the king to b7 and not the rook. Even if both of them are, in theory, losing moves, the king would give Black way more chances to draw the game. Let's give a quick example. We got pawn to h5, and king to d5, king to g5, and c6. Black doesn't really have any good moves, so he's just going to repeat. Pawn to h6, takes, c5, and White would push his other pawn. g4, d5, g5, e5, and we see this nice little maneuver with rook to c1. Now, as I said, White is going to give up the b pawn in order to promote the g pawn. So rook takes, king takes on h7, rook to b7 check, king to h6, rook to b6 check, pawn to g6, rook to b2, g7, rook g2, h7, and here we see a Lucena position that I actually already have a video on where I show you how to promote this pawn over here. h2 check, g8, d6, rook to f1, king to e7. And here White is going to create a bridge, meaning he needs to put the rook behind the pawn in order to promote it. But we need to make sure that the enemy king is at least 2 squares away from the pawn. So the first move is to drive the king away with rook to e1 check. King moves to d7, and now white is going to play rook to e4, lifting the rook up and preparing to put it behind the pawn. So rook moves to h1, king moves to f7, rook to f1, and in order to promote, white is going to need to bring the king down to the 5th rank. Now when he arrives there, he's going to defend against the check with his rook. So to achieve that, we're going to play king to g6. Rook moves to g1, and be careful here. You really need to play king to f6 and not f5, because you need to defend your last pawn. So we have king to f6, rook to f1, king to g5, and now when black checks, we're going to defend with rook to g4, creating what's called a bridge. So that was the rook block. Now let's see what happens when the king blocks and why it's going to give black way more chances of drawing the game. Now it's white to play. What's your next move here? If you're thinking pawn to h5, unfortunately, that's going to be a move that draws the game. This is why king to b7 is a much more powerful defense for black, because he can use his rook to draw the game. If the king moves to g5, then rook to c5, and the white king is never going to be able to make it to the 5th rank. Pawn moves to h6, g3, c4, g4. Now black is just going to end up repeating moves. If instead you try rook to b5 to prevent black from reaching the 5th rank first, black can play rook to c4. So instead of keeping the white king away from the 5th rank, he's going to keep it away from the 6th rank by playing rook to c6. And again, white has no way of making any progress. Okay, so the pawn clearly just wasn't the correct move. But what about king to f5? Sadly, if you're playing that, you're going to allow black to draw the game. Again, we see why the king should block the pawn instead of the rook. Black would play rook to f8, king to g5. Black plays d8, and black can make the same defense with the rook on the 5th rank. Okay. So, what's the winning principle here? The winning move is the unnatural rook move to the side of the pawn. Now, it might look like a blunder. White is giving up the pawn, but that's actually the winning pattern in these kinds of positions. And we're going to see why in a minute. Now, first of all, black can't capture that pawn, because if he does, white can trade rooks, and his king is going to arrive on that critical e6 square. Okay. Now, black is going to try to defend with rook to g8, because if he moves anything else, white is going to take all the pawns. And now, rook to e6 from white. The reason for this move is to get the rook involved in the kingside attack as well. If before we had a king and pawns versus a rook and pawns, now we have a king and a rook versus only a rook, and that's clearly a winning position. King to a6 by black, king to g5, king to b7. Black has nothing better to do than repeat moves. Pawn to h5, moves to g4, and in this position, you got to be careful not to blunder the move to h6, because black is going to be able to draw the game if you do that. Pawn takes, king takes, and rook takes on g4. Now white takes black's last pawn, but unfortunately for him, he's not going to be able to convert this. Okay, no. So in this position, the winning idea is to step back with the king and push the h-pawn when the enemy king is on b7. You can win even if he's on a6, but it's going to be a lot more difficult to do that. The reason you step back with your king is because if you push the h-pawn and black captures, you want to recapture with the rook, because the king needs to defend the g-pawn. So, rook takes, rook moves to g7 to defend the final pawn, king to h5, king to h6, and again, let's see if you can find the easiest win for white here. Okay, the easiest way to win is to bring the rook to c6, with the idea that when the black king moves to b7, white is going to exchange rooks and sacrifice that pawn to promote the other one. So, that's it for this endgame video. Hope you found it useful. Hope you learned a couple things. Good luck in your games. See you next time.